of China was once shrouded in mystery to the rest of the ancient world. The Silk Road was a connection between the two realms that suggested China to be of immense wealth and power. Whilst these distant civilizations would see dramatic falls, China would continue to rise through countless dynasties and emperors for thousands of years, forming the global superpower we know today. From constructing the longest structure in the world to hosting the largest and deadliest wars in mankind's history, China is the longest continuous civilization on Earth, dating back 5,000 years, withstanding the ancient era, the Middle Ages, and now the modern period. But can they continue on? To understand this fascinating land, we must start from the beginning. The majority of China's earliest settlements began along the basin of the Yellow River in the north and the Yangtze in the south. The people resided on floodplains and lived agricultural lifestyles, growing a plethora of millet and rice. The conditions were fair for farming, but a major issue plagued the newly blossoming communities. Flooding from the Yellow River constantly displaced or killed settlers, washing away their crops and lodgings in the process. The land was cruel and inhospitable, threatening their newfound way of life. That was until the legendary and likely mythological Yu the Engineer was tasked with controlling the flow of the rivers. Yu knew firsthand that the waterways had not been the settlers' biggest adversary for no reason. His father Gwyn had already spearheaded past efforts to control the rivers, and a decade of his life had been spent on building a series of dikes and dams which ultimately proved ineffective. No matter how large Gwyn and his men built their walls, the river would prevail time and time again. Unfazed by his father's failures, Yu was more than determined to carry out the monumental task. He recruited the help of one Hou Yi, another semi-mythical agricultural genius, who is credited with supposedly introducing millet to humanity. The pair discussed schematics together and eventually built a canal-based irrigation system, which removed most of the excess floodwater into the sea, while saving some to be reutilized for the growing of crops. Just like that, the system's debut had finally ended the era of flooding, and Yu the Engineer was named China's ruler on account of his great success. Thus began the Shang Dynasty, the catalyst for China's dynastic system. The dynasty and its lands were very prosperous under Yu. They remained a mainly agricultural society, but are credited with creating many great Chinese inventions, such as stone tools used for farming and the lunar calendar. Eventually, Yu divided the territory into 9 provinces, and while each one was governed by their own lord, they were required to stay loyal to Yu's reign. Long after his years of stopping rivers and winning battles against neighboring tribes, old age and death closed in on Yu, which brought forth the question, what now? Yu decided that he did not want to pass the torch of leadership onto his son Qi. He instead wished for his Minister of Justice, Gao Yao, to take over. Unfortunately, Gao Yao died soon thereafter, and so a tribal leader named Yi was chosen to take on the role. The provincial lords disagreed with this decision. They had grown so fond of Yu the Great throughout his 45 years as emperor that they insisted upon his son Qi being his successor. Their wish was eventually granted. Qi was the first ruler of China to be granted power, not for his merit or capability, but because of his bloodline and connections. This hereditary system would last for thousands of years. It was in the 16th century BCE that the Shang Dynasty finally met its fate. The last ruler of Yu the Great's bloodline, Zhou, was said to be a cruel, sadistic leader who led a handful of military operations solely for revenge and personal gain, and filled his free time with sex slaves, drunken orgies, and senseless violence. Perhaps he was too blinded by his hedonism to sense what was brewing in the lands he now ruled. There was a concept in ancient China known as the Mandate of Heaven, a seemingly Shakespearean principle that not only states that heaven gives noble men the ruling power of China, but that any wicked, unjust leaders will be removed. Heaven had clearly taken issue with Zhou. China had entered the Bronze Age, and much to Zhou's dismay, a new rebellious power emerged with brand new bronze weapons. The Shang were promptly overthrown by this group, which would become known as the Qin Dynasty. Not only did they emerge victorious against the corrupt King Zhou and his men, but the Qin Dynasty to this day have something that the Shang lack: a written history. Oracle bone inscriptions were an ancient form of Chinese writing. usually engraved on animal bones or turtle shells. There are over 3,000 documented characters from the era of the Qin Dynasty, many of which are either still used or similar to modern Chinese characters. Considering the Qing Dynasty was in power about 3,600 years ago, we know an impressive amount about daily life and key traditions because of archaeological finds such as the oracle bones. The Qing Dynasty was quite mobile, and oftentimes traveled to various islands and shores on their conquests. Upon each return, they would bring back seashells which were used as currency within their society. They employed a feudal system that brought great wealth to nobility and subjugated peasants and farmers to difficult lives. The poor possessed little agency, but the military and government were far too powerful at the time for any peasant resistance to overthrow them. The Qing leaders were a highly religious people with high priests having heaps of influence over the lands. These priests paid much attention to the death and dying process, as well as subsequent burials, and established a handful of rituals to preserve their power and safety, both on Earth and in heaven. Common practices in the dynasty included sacrificing humans for good weather and fortune, as well as burying slaves alive with their masters to ensure their servitude in the afterlife. The Qing Dynasty possessed a mighty military and workforce, conquering region after region and building major walled cities across the land as they went. It was a restless time, with constant battles with various tribes, as well as internal struggles, forcing the Qing to move their capital city 5 times. But their skill in molding bronze weapons and chariot wheels allowed them to squash opposing forces and remain in power for around 600 years. In a life that eerily resembled that of Xia ruler Zhou, the last Qing emperor Di Xin was overcome by temptations and began living a life of pure debauchery. He hosted massive orgies and inflicted cruel sadistic torture onto those who opposed him. A handful of Di Xin's family members were jailed for trying to intervene in his life of partying, and it is said that he had his own uncle's heart ripped out of his chest as punishment. It was in 1046 BCE when the Zhou of the Wei Valley, vassals of the Shang, challenged the dynasty's reign at the Battle of Muya. The impoverished Chinese population was strongly in support of the Zhou, and many slaves being forced to fight for the diminishing Qing dynasty defected to fight for the Zhou. The members of the Shang army who remained loyal were eviscerated in a bloody battle that resulted in the deaths of around 50,000 Zhou soldiers and hundreds of thousands of the Shang army. After such a dismal effort, Di Xin fled to his palace, surrounded himself with his treasures, and set the building on fire, killing himself. With such a decisive victory, the Zhou believed they had inherited the mandate of heaven, which would now become a major principle of Chinese politics. The Zhou dynasty was China's longest-lasting dynasty, spanning 789 years from 1046 BCE to 256 BCE. The events of those nearly 8 centuries were some of the most important happenings not only in Chinese history, but in the development of the world as we know it. It was a period distinctly marked by both invention and change. Large-scale irrigation systems transformed agriculture. A new network of canals was built to transport various goods across previously unfathomably long distances. Horseback riding became the standard for both travel and military use. News of silk production spread to Europe, and the Chinese moved past bronze in favor of mastering iron. Perhaps the most significant of these newfound transitions was that of bronze to iron. Europe and the Middle East were hundreds of years behind the Zhou, who could now cast iron using heat-resistant clay in furnaces and molds. They used the liquefied metal to mass-produce weapons and farming tools, propelling both the military and general society forward at an unprecedented rate. With such a rapidly growing empire, however, instability is sure to rear its head. The Zhou dynasty can be split up into 2 distinct periods, the first of which is the Western Zhou. During this time, the newfound dynasty was operating under the feudal system, a pyramid-shaped power structure where the power and land are concentrated in the royal family and are distributed to local lords as is seen fit. While this was functional for the Zhou for about 2 centuries, their control and stability began to diminish as the feudal lords grew increasingly powerful and self-serving. They began to revolt and raided the capital of Haoxing, and in a move that echoed their previous rulers' constant capital movements, the Zhou fled to their new capital city, Luoyang. In everything but name and technicality, the vassal states had essentially taken control of the land and its governance. This transition marked the beginning of the Eastern Zhou period, now recognized as having begun in 771 BCE. This era yielded perhaps the most significant Chinese philosophies of all time in three schools of thought: Confucianism, legalism, and Taoism. Confucius, or Master Kong, was the most renowned ancient Chinese philosopher, and his school of thought aimed to create a society driven by respect, justice, and a widespread desire for peace. He was born as Kong Chu in the Zhou state of Lu. His father, Kong He, was a commandant of the Lu's garrison, but died when Confucius was only 3 years old, leaving his mother to raise the boy alone in poverty. He committed his life to education and studied classic Chinese works at a school for commoners. Now educated in literature, history, and music, he was married at 19 and raised a family. Confucius's mother passed away just a short 4 years later around the age of 40. Confucius is said to have mourned her death for 3 years. He worked in a variety of low-ranking government jobs, such as bookkeeping and tending to livestock, just to afford a dignified burial for his mother. As he grew older, Confucius had built a considerable reputation amongst the local ruling class. The state of Lu was ruled by 3 ducal families, who appointed Confucius as the minister of criminal matters. Confucius believed that there was a natural goodness to humanity, and so the core of his philosophy was to restore an ethically decrepit China's moral code through social relationships. After hearing of the wars, orgies, live burials, and disembowelment practiced by past rulers, one can understand why he had grown increasingly discontent with the decay of Chinese society. He created a hierarchy of being to restore order, and insisted upon each citizen understanding and adopting their respective role in this latter. This system is known as the 5 bonds, and describes the following relationships needed to achieve social harmony: ruler to subject, husband to wife, father to son, elder brother to younger brother, and friend to friend. Confucius stressed the importance of respecting one's elders and accepting their subjugation as a necessary step to maintaining a civil society. Family is at the basis of the 5 bonds, and its effects are still seen in modern-day China. The tradition of filial piety means that parents are indebted to their children in terms of offering care, safety, and education, and children are indebted to their parents in terms of offering services, respect, and maintaining the family's honor through their actions. A family is to uphold their morals as a unit, and the benevolent family unit will subsequently expand to a greater Chinese society, as China to Confucius was, in essence, one massive family. His system called for the government to serve and take care of its people, as parents would their children. While Confucius called for social harmony through widespread benevolence, another school of thought was developing in China that directly opposed his teachings: legalism. Unlike Confucianism, legalism states that people are inherently bad and require law and punishment to be kept in order. It was developed from the teachings of Han Dynasty, a Confucian reformer who believed that an ordered society is a strict society, and a good citizen is one who allows themselves to be controlled. It gained traction rivaling Confucianism throughout the Zhou Dynasty. The third major philosophy of the Zhou was Taoism, which stressed the need for humanity to reach a natural harmony with the universe. Humans are supposed to follow the universe's will, and should avoid the tendency to go against its energy. The classic yin and yang symbol encapsulates the philosophy, as one must accept the natural balance and forces of the universe to achieve harmony. Unlike Confucianism and legalism, which called for different moral actions and behaviors from the Chinese population, Taoism embraced inaction, and a philosophy that can aptly be summarized as going with the flow. These 3 philosophies are all incredibly prevalent throughout Chinese history and the contemporary state, and are the most important contribution of the Zhou dynasty's reign. Because of the prominence of philosophical development in this time, the era and its products are recognized as the 100 Years of Thought. At the same time as these developments, various states within the Zhou dynasty were beginning to declare their independence. Former dukes calling themselves kings, and insisted they were politically on par with the Zhou king. This period is known as the Warring States, a time of unrest in which 7 former vassal states fought for the ultimate reign of China's lands. They were the Qin, Han, Yuan, Wei, Chu, and Qi. It was at this time that famed general and strategist Sun Tzu wrote The Art of War, the earliest documented work on military science and war. Though the book covered a wide range of military tactics and wartime philosophies, such as when to push your armies forward and how to develop strategic flexibility in the face of a wildly unpredictable war, it is no wonder why the art of war was birthed in this era. War had transformed in China. Battles became more sophisticated in the Warring States period, with generals using strategy and deceit to gain the upper hand. With increased troop numbers and conscriptions for males as young as 15, individual battles also often dragged on for much longer than a handful of days like the clashes of before, with some stretching as long as months or years. The most powerful rising force of the country during this time was the Qin. They were led by Yin Zheng, or Qin Shi Huang, which literally translates to First Emperor of Qin. They resided in a dangerous region of China where a powerful military was in need for survival, and thus adopted the use of various weapons technologies such as iron swords and crossbows. The first of the 7 kingdoms to collapse at the hands of the Qin was Han. They were the weakest of the bunch, and their territory rested right in the center of ancient China, leaving them vulnerable to attacks from all sides. Though the alliances and mutual interests of before protected them in the past, the Warring States period brought forth an every-man-for-himself attitude. Yin Zheng and his men swiftly conquered the territory and forced King An of Han's surrender within a year, though there were far more worthy opponents in the near future. Yin Zheng's next target was the state of Zhou. It was not the first time the two sides had battled. Just a couple decades ago, they had fought in the Battle of Kangping, which stands as one of the deadliest battles in human history. Records estimate 450,000 Zhou deaths and 250,000 deaths on the Qin side. Because of this decisive Qin victory, the Zhou state was still weakened when Yin Zheng marched his men past their borders to finish what had been started long ago. Despite their decaying state, the Zhou possessed something that the Qin did not: a general by the name of Li Mu. Li Mu had an impressive military reputation for his previous deceits of massive enemy armies and victories in numerous raids and battles. When it became clear that the Qin had their sights set on conquering the state of Zhou, his attention too shifted to the western borders to confront the newly ascended Yin Zheng. Any progress troops made were immediately trumped by Li Mu's tactics, and it became quite clear to Yin Zheng that so long as Li Mu was alive, little progress would be made. Failing on the battlefield, he targeted the general through tricky political means. He bribed figures of the Zhou courts and sent spies to create disorder within their governmental systems. His goal was to create distrust between Yunyu, a king of Zhou, and General Li Mu. He eventually succeeded, and the king became convinced that Li Mu and his trusted associates were planning a violent rebellion. The general was relieved of his position and executed. Zhou was swiftly conquered after Li Mu's death, as his replacement, Zhao Kong, was no match for the bloodthirsty Qin. The state's capital, Han Dynasty, was taken over in 228 BCE, and Yin Zheng saw to it that naive King Yunyu was too executed. Though there were some self-proclaimed kings and kingdoms of Zhou following this major loss, the state was no longer a true threat to the Qin. Any rebellion or descendant of a king that rose to power was squashed over the course of the next handful of years, until the region as a whole was completely annexed. After this success, Yin Zheng then directed his focus to the kingdom of Yuan. Well aware of the impending military force at his doorstep, the Crown Prince Dan aimed to defeat the Qin in another way, by assassinating Yin Zheng himself. He picked an assassin named Jin Ke to kill Zheng in a suicide mission using a poison dagger of the sharpest possible quality. The plan was to approach the Qin court and pretend to be a traitorous nobleman begging for mercy. He was to offer maps of Dukong, the fertile farmland region that Zheng wanted to claim first in his conquest, as well as the head of defective Qin general Huan Yi's head, before sticking the blade deep into Yin Zheng. The dagger would be hidden along the side of the maps, so Jin Ke could strike as soon as he got close. Huan Yi, the owner of the aforementioned head required for this plan to work, had fallen out of the Qin's good graces and was seeking revenge for their dismissal, causing the Qin to put a bounty of 1,000 gold pieces on his head. After Jin Ke explained the plan, the disgraced general agreed to commit suicide by cutting his own throat for the sake of collecting his head, so long as it would mean that Yin Zheng would die and the Qin would collapse. He cut his own throat without protest. With both the head and the maps now ready, Jin Ke and his supremely nervous associate, Qin Wuyang, traveled to present their gifts to Yin Zheng. Qin Wuyang was so anxious when they reached the palace that he entered a near-paralyzed state and was almost unable to move. Jin Ke excused his skittish behavior as nothing more than awe and cultural shock, as Qin Wuyang was but a rural boy who had never truly seen the world. Despite Jin Ke's excuses, Qin Wuyang was not allowed to move up any further, and the assassin would now have to enter the court by his lonesome. Jinka calmly approached King Zheng with a map scroll and waited for it to be unrolled before grabbing the dagger and lunging towards him. King Zheng was startled by the sudden movement and was able to slip out of his grasp, turning away and running away from the attacker. Mayhem ensued in the palace, with the king narrowly surviving by continuously running in circles behind a pillar. The armed guards were all but stationed outside, and his ceremonial sword was too long to be pulled out quickly enough to defend himself against Jinka. So all he could do was hope that someone would intervene before the assassin closed in. Luckily for King Zheng, a royal physician stepped forward and hurled his medicine bag at Jinka, slowing him down just long enough for the king to unsheath his blade. He stabbed Jinka in the leg, prompting the injured assassin to throw his dagger in a last-gasp attempt to kill his target. He missed and was stabbed 8 more times by King Zheng. In his dying moments, the assassin taunted the king with obscene gestures until both he and the now fleeing Qin Wuyang were executed by the guards. The attempt had failed horribly, and had only created an angrier, more obsessive Yin Zheng. He and his army invaded Yuan in 226 BCE and quickly conquered the capital, Jicheng. In an effort to earn the king of Qin's forgiveness, a now desperate King Shi of Yuan executed his own son, the Crown Prince Dan, as an apology for the assassination attempt. He sent the head of his boy to Yin Zheng, which postponed the complete annexation of Yan for a small handful of years before the Qin returned to destroy them once and for all in 222 BCE. Yin Zheng began his attacks on the states of Wei and Chu at the same time, fearing that one state may take advantage of the fact that the Qin were solely focused on the other and catch the Qin armies off guard. 2 of Yin Zheng's most trusted generals, a father-son duo by the names of Wang Zhen and Wang Ben, launched simultaneous attacks on the 2 states in 225 BCE. While Wang Zhen began the Qin conquest of the incredibly large and powerful Chu, his son Wang Ben led an army of 600,000 men to conquer 10 cities along the northern border of Wei, thereby guarding their flank. Wei crumbled fairly easily after Wang Ben cleverly redirected the waters of the Yellow River to flood the capital of Dalian. 100,000 people, many of which were civilians, were killed in the flooding. The king surrendered, allowing for all the Qin manpower to be focused on the powerful Chu. Their initial attacks on the Chu had not been particularly successful, with the Qin army being pushed back and repelled. Wang Zhen was brought out of retirement 2 years after the initial sieges, with an army 3 times larger than before, and the capital city was taken. The king was captured, and the state was annexed, leaving only one state to be captured, Qi. In 221 BCE, Yin Zheng's men faced very little pushback and conquered the kingdom within the same year. When the Qin arrived at the capital city, the king of Qi simply surrendered the land without a fight. The warring states had all been conquered, and thus began the Qin Dynasty, ruled under the iron fist of Yin Zheng. Though they displayed great promise and power in the Warring States period, leading Yin Zheng to proclaim that his dynasty would rule for 10,000 generations, the Qin's dynastic cycle was relatively short-lived, lasting approximately 15 years from 221 BCE to 206 BCE. Despite this, their effects proved to be very important and durable across the following centuries. The name China comes from Qin. In contrast with the feudalist Zhou, whose decentralization ultimately led to the dynasty's downfall, the Qin enacted an intense centralization and subjugation of the state's citizens. Yin Zheng's main efforts included registering each citizen with the government, directing the flow of taxes to the state instead of feudal lords, and dividing the land into provinces, each one governed by an appointed official acting as an appendage of his ruling. He also aimed to standardize currencies, writing systems, and weights. While these changes were primarily for the sake of making the population more manageable and controllable, they contributed to the creation of a culturally homogeneous Chinese identity that was previously unseen throughout the country's history. China had become a united empire, and Yin Zheng its first true emperor. The Qin were notorious for their cruelty and harsh punishments. As legalists, they believed people were born evil, and that the only way to sustain a civilized society was to utilize ghastly criminal punishments and deter potentially disobedient citizens solely through fear. Yin Zheng needed everyone in China to understand that he, and he alone, ruled the land. Governmental workers and military personnel were also subjected to collective punishments to hold entire labor groups accountable for their work. If one man neglected his duties, it would come at the cost of the entire collective's well-being. The life of a peasant under the Qin, and in ancient China in general, was very taxing. Peasants worked long, straining hours, typically in one of two fields: farming or silk weaving. Entertainment was used to relieve the stress of long working days. Theater and dance were very popular, and formerly military training games such as Kuju, a game similar to hacky sack, were adopted to pass the time. The Qin state was a patriarchal society, and life could be very difficult for women. They primarily stayed home to tend to the children and look after the household, and had little to no say in marital issues, land acquisition or sales, or daily local proceedings. Peasants did not particularly like the emperor, detesting him for his cruel punishments and adoption of legalism. It was not just his own population that Ying had to fear. Nomadic tribes, particularly the Shonu, who are believed to be the predecessors to the Huns, continuously terrorized the northern Qin borders. Armed horsemen would launch fierce intrusions on China's outskirts, highlighting the Qin's need for strengthened borders. This led to the most significant construction effort of the Qin Dynasty, a Great Wall. This wasn't the same Great Wall of China we know today, though parts of the incredible architectural feat are still visible today. Sections of the Great Wall had already been built, tracing back to the 5th century BCE, though Qin Shi Huang was the first to think of uniting all of the existing pieces to form one Great Wall. Peasants who were deemed lazy or unproductive in their farming or market jobs were oftentimes sent to work on the wall. Transporting materials was very difficult, so the wall was mainly built out of whatever resources were readily available in each particular area. In mountainous regions, the wall was made of mountain stones, while rammed earth was used in the plains. Though the Qin did not view the wall as a permanent solution, the project would be continued over many successive centuries to form the Great Wall we know today. Though he had conquered the warring states at just the age of 38, survived 3 assassination attempts throughout the course of his rule, and now fortified the state of Qin, there was one enemy Ying could not defeat: death itself. When Ying reached middle age, he became obsessed with his own mortality and sought out various elixirs and potions to extend his life. He sent alchemists and explorers on quests around the Pacific to find the legendary island of Penglai, whose mountain supposedly held the elixir of immortality. Ying was so desperate that he could not understand he was being conned, primarily by Xu Fu, the leader of these expeditions. On the first voyage, Xu Fu was sent with 3,000 virgin boys and girls and 60 boats, but of course returned empty-handed as the island was mythological. Possibly fearing the consequences of a failed mission, Xu Fu and the explorers that returned from the voyage claimed that their passage was obstructed by a giant sea creature. Xu Fu requested a troop of archers for their next effort to defeat the creature and move forward with their conquest. Ying obliged and once again provided everything he requested, though Xu Fu and his crews never returned from the trip. What exactly happened is still unknown today, though the most popular theory is that Xu Fu simply sailed to Japan and colonized it. Growing increasingly paranoid and desperate, Ying began ingesting potions his own alchemists had created. It is at this time that a series of now famed book burnings and live burials took place, as Ying had grown utterly mad. Wanting to erase all history and ideologies he saw as diminishing to his reign and the Qin Dynasty, Ying had 460 Confucian scholars buried alive and destroyed many of their texts in mass book burnings, which were the first documented book burnings in human history. Soon thereafter, in an ironic twist, Ying quest for eternal life led to his death at the age of 49. The concoctions he was supplied with by his alchemist contained high levels of mercury, which killed the emperor by poisoning. Before the emperor's death, he had commanded the construction of a grand mausoleum to house his body. An underground necropolis flooded with artifacts, monuments, and thousands of clay warriors to follow Ying into the afterlife was accidentally uncovered by a group of farmers in 1974 AD. The scale and detail of each soldier shocked archaeologists. No two warriors had the same facial features. And just like a real army, they were divided by military rank in battle formation. Each one was equipped with a real weapon that had never been used in battle. There are clear signs of mass production simply to arm the terracotta warriors with new, undamaged weapons. Ying had clearly decided that if he could not conquer death, he would conquer the afterlife. There is still plenty of mystery regarding the terracotta warriors. We don't know who exactly built the Grand Mausoleum, or why there is no documented history of its construction. It is estimated that it took over 700,000 workers to build. Because of this enigma and the grand scale of the findings, Ying's terracotta army is referred to as the eighth wonder of the world. Following the emperor's passing, his associate Li Si kept his death a secret with the hopes of snatching power away from Ying's eldest son and successor, Fusu. Li Si sought to prevent him from gaining any more political might than he already had, as Fusu had ties with a general that rivaled Li Si in court. The pair would surely remove him from power if they were in control. Li Si brought the king's corpse back to the capital in a merchant caravan of rotting fish to mask the scent of death. He then created a fake document, supposedly written by Ying, commanding both Fusu and the general to commit suicide. The plan worked, and with both of their targets dead, another son of the emperor took power. That son was Qin Shi, who quickly proved to be far less capable than his widely feared father. He was incredibly self-indulgent and childish, killing. However, Li Si would not take power. Qin Shi would suspect him and others of corruption and treason. Li Si was sentenced to execution by death of 1,000 cuts. This method of execution involved the condemned person being subjected to a series of cuts or slices to various parts of their body. The intent was not to cause immediate death, but to prolong the suffering of the condemned. Additionally, to top it off, his entire family to the third degree was executed. Quickly capitalizing on the weakened state, mass revolts began. Lu Bang, a peasant under the Qin Dynasty, spearheaded a major uprising and gained control of the land after a fierce clash known as the Battle of Gaisha, in which over 100,000 men were either killed or taken prisoner. Thus began the incredibly successful Han Dynasty. With his victory, Liu Bang seized the title of emperor, changed his name to Gaozu, and established the capital of the new state of Han in Chang'an. It is one of the only parts of the destroyed Qin state with a surviving palace, making for a fairly easy decision. Chang'an is where the Han's namesake comes from, and the period in which it served as the state capital is known as the Western Han, lasting from 206 BCE to 9 AD. Today, over 90% of Chinese people identify as ethnically Han, making up nearly 20% of the world. The Han were the world's most populous state, and were contemporaries of the Roman Empire. After gaining power, Gaozu cemented Chinese policies that would last for thousands of years. Coming from peasantry himself, he quickly sought to replace many of the rulings and precedents he saw to be unfair to the commoner. Taxes were heavily cut, especially in regions who were particularly affected by the wars. Many slaves were freed as well. Confucianism was brought back as the main philosophical school of thought, and was taught in the state's new Imperial Academy. Family loyalty and virtue were once again the main pillars of Chinese society, not fear or punishment. Gaozu also established the system of civil service to prevent lazy and unqualified men from serving in important political positions. The ruling class was based on merit and education rather than familial connections. This governmental system would last all the way until 1912 AD, nearly 2,000 years later. Although Gaozu and his Han state had secured power, the empire was far from safe. The same nomadic Shonu who threatened the Qin were still a dangerous threat, and the loyalty of many Han generals was questionable at best. Following a series of humiliating defeats at the hands of the Shonu, Gaozu made peace with the tribes and agreed to pay tribute. Wine and women were gifted to the Shonu on an annual basis to preserve the peace. Gaozu died in 195 BCE, which started a power struggle to claim the throne. Though Hui, the second son of Gaozu, became the next emperor, the true ruler of Han was Hui's mother, Gaozu's empress consort, Empress Lu. She had murdered several of his sons to ensure her power following Gaozu's death, though her most famous killing was that of Gaozu's favored mistress, Lady Qi. Lady Qi also had children with Gaozu, and Lu did not desire any competition. Sima Qin, a historian from the Han Dynasty, wrote that Empress Lu cut off Lady Qi's hands and feet, plucked out her eyes, burned her ears, gave her a potion to drink which made her mute, and had her thrown into the privy, calling her human swine. Emperor Hui was so disgusted and demoralized by his mother's murderous actions that he essentially handed over the ruling power to her. He lived a short life of drinking and sex until his death in 188 BCE at the age of 22. A handful of rulers gained and lost power over the following decades, maintaining a relatively solid sense of peace and prosperity given the ongoing conflict with the Shogun. In 141 BCE, Emperor Wu became the leader of Han and would rule for 57 years, up until 87 BCE. It was also at this time that relations with the Shogun had reached a boiling point, and full-fledged war began in 133 BCE. A handful of Han men were sent west during the war to seek out potential allies of the Shogun. Silk trade in China was being hindered by the tribes, and the Han sought alliances with Western peoples to fight the Shogun. What they brought back was knowledge about civilizations, trade, and the economies of the Western world, India, and the Middle East. A trade route called the Silk Road was established, which connected all the way from China to the Mediterranean Sea. The name Silk Road came from the Greek word for China, Ceres, which translates to the land of silk. China would come to rely on the Silk Road for trade for more than 1,500 years. The Silk Road allowed for unprecedented cultural exchange, which led to the introduction of Buddhism in China, though whether or not Emperor Wu was aware of the religion during his time is unknown today. The Han territory grew considerably at this time of war, as they won many major battles against the Shogun tribes. The dynasty expanded south into regions of modern-day Vietnam and Myanmar. Despite their victories, the Han treasury was depleted from all the resources poured into the conflict. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers died while peasants were heavily taxed to fund the war, bringing forth a period of rebellion and instability. In the year 9 AD, a rising politician by the name of Wang Ming capitalized on the shaky state of Han and established the very short-lived Qin Dynasty. All of the empire's land was seized by Wang Ming and redistributed to the peasantry, which earned him the historical nickname of China's Socialist Emperor. Policies such as this were not received well by the wealthier citizens. The empire was left in shambles after a series of natural disasters and a famine, creating yet another period of instability and rebellion. Just like in the case of the preceding Western Han, the Qin Dynasty also failed to extinguish the Shogun threat at the northern borders of China, leading to the treasury being depleted once again. The people of Qin had had enough. There were two major rebellion groups that gained prominence at this time: the Red Eyebrows and the Lulin. The name Red Eyebrows came to be as the rebels painted their eyebrows red to distinguish themselves from those who supported the government and ruling class. The imperial armies were defeated time and time again by the various rebel parties, and Wang Ming was killed in battle in 23 AD. Though the Red Eyebrows continuously defied odds and showed great promise, they collapsed after falling out of the public's favor because of their disorganization and lack of direction in restoring peace to China. They were viewed as a mob-like presence due to their brutal treatment of local populations and desecration of Han graves. The Red Eyebrows were trapped in a state of constant disarray and frequent deaths towards the tail end of their fighting years. The Red Eyebrows surrendered to Lu Shu, one of 11 self-proclaimed emperors at the time who had been involved with the contemporary Lulin rebellion against Wang Ming. Lu Shu, or Emperor Guangyu, was very benevolent and pardoned the Red Eyebrows before beginning his conquest of the entire empire. Over the course of a decade, he squashed all of the other self-proclaimed emperors until he alone claimed the throne. The city of Chang'an had been destroyed in the rebellions, so Guangyu established the new Han capital in Luoyang. This period is known as the Eastern Han, the latter half of the long-withstanding Han Dynasty. Under Guangwu, taxes were lowered, and the emperor saw to it that the quality of life improved for the peasantry. Over 100 academic institutes were established using government funds to ensure a well-educated future ruling class. Guangwu continued to promote Confucianism and set up a system in which local governors would nominate young men who properly embodied Confucian virtues for governmental roles. With an excellent basis set under the dynasty's first emperor, the Eastern Han entered a new golden age over the 1st and 2nd centuries. The economy was thriving, educational policies were as thorough as they'd ever been, and the military was incredibly powerful. Crossbows allowed the Han to kill their enemies from a safe distance, and durable iron axes and swords greatly improved their close-range combat abilities. Resistance in Vietnam and Korea were destroyed, and the Xiongnu tribes within the Han borders were defeated when they once again turned against the empire. The role of the emperor became much less respected at this time, as the civil servant class became the most dominant members of Chinese hierarchies. Paper was also invented at this time, allowing for their ideas to be shared much easier than in days past. Emperors were put in place and removed as the civil servants saw fit, but were usually more concerned with their lavish lifestyles than their duties at the helm of the empire anyway. This absence of centralized leadership led to worse policies that raised taxes and allowed for another famine in China. And so, another powerful resistance group rose from the ashes, the Yellow Turban Rebellion. Led by Taoist Jing Zhou, who claimed that the Han Dynasty was already on its last legs, the rebels began attacking government offices and pillaging villages in 184. Though they ultimately failed to bring down the Han, the empire was indeed on its way out. In order to defeat the Yellow Turbans, the bureaucracy's forced hand gave significant amounts of power back to the nobility, who split up as individual warlords, each with their own controlled regions. Another period of warring states began until the last emperor of Han was dethroned, and only 3 major kingdoms remained: Wei, Wu, and Shu Han. Shu Han, the least populated state, was the first to go. They surrendered to Wei after exhausting their powers fighting Wu. Despite their now massive chunk of territory, the Wei went next. They were taken over out of nowhere by a powerful clan called Jin, who then defeated Wu, the last of the 3 kingdoms, in 280. This meant that China was reunited and a new dynasty began. Emperor Wu of Jin was the first to rule the Qin Dynasty, and built a legacy of indulgence, waste, and sexual prowess. He quickly became far more focused on feasting and having sex in his harems than fulfilling any of his political duties. In 281, 5,000 women were brought from the palace of conquered Wu Emperor's son Hao to his own in Luoyang. With all the beautiful women now at his disposal, Emperor Wu was overwhelmed with a choice, and had difficulty deciding whom he should have sex with. His famous solution to this problem was to ride around in a goat-drawn cart. Wherever the goat stopped, Wu would get out and have sex with whichever woman was there. Some of the women began leaving bamboo leaves and salt outside their bedrooms, hoping to lure the goats into stopping at their rooms. Wu was utterly sex-crazed, using this goat-drawn method nearly every day for 8 years. He went so far as to criminalize new marriages until he was finished picking his concubines to ensure he could sleep with any woman he desired. When Emperor Wu died in 290, the Qin Dynasty got caught up in a civil war known as the War of the 8 Princes after his death. Numerous factions wanted to gain power now that there was an opening, and started bringing in nomadic tribes such as the Xiongnu to assist them. This backfired, with the nomadic people turning on the Qin Dynasty and claiming the north region of the empire. The Qin accordingly moved their capital south to Jiankang. What ensued was countless changes in ruling families in both the barbarian-run north as well as the Qin south. Both regions were incredibly unstable until the Sui dynasty was erected in 581 and unified the empire once again in 589. While the Sui dynasty was very short-lived, they acted as a very important turning point in Chinese history. They reinstated the rule of China's ethnic Han, and began efforts to culturally assimilate the barbarians that had migrated into China. Confucianism and Buddhism were heavily fostered at this time, as the Emperor Wen of Sui had been raised and taught by a Buddhist nun. It was a difficult time to be in power. North of the Sui, in the central steppes, the Turks were rising to power and becoming a formidable force, which made expansion difficult for the dynasty. While the empire was relatively stable for a short period of time, it began to deteriorate very fast because of the evil Emperor Yongguang's constant misuse of resources. Yongguang was obsessed with construction projects and war. Many peasants worked to death rebuilding the Great Wall, and he sent millions of soldiers to die in his attempted conquest of Goguryeo, which is modern-day Korea. The last attack on Goguryeo had been an utterly pathetic failure, resulting in a 90% casualty rate for the Sui troops, and a relatively tiny one for the Goguryeo. This all spurred more rebellions as the peasantry was fed up. A father and son duo became the 2 most important figures in China during this time of resistance. The father, Li Yuan, had been born in 566 in the Three Kingdoms period. Li Yuan had many familial connections to the throne, with many family members close to the emperor, though that did not exactly make things easier for him. Emperor Yongguang was evil, tyrannical, and brutal, and offered little help to Li Yuan. His son, Li Shimin, was a very bold military leader who successfully fought against the Turks on multiple occasions. He famously tricked his opponents by bringing an excessive amount of flags and drums to the battlefield to make them retreat, thinking that the Sui army was much larger than it actually was. Though both Li Yuan and Li Shimin were initially loyal to the Sui dynasty throughout this time of war, it became increasingly clear to both of them that the empire was in decline. Li Yuan was very sacred and timid, and did not wish to turn on their leaders considering the number of family members that were close to the throne. If Yongguang caught wind of rebellion, Li Yuan's family, including his daughter, Pingyang, would surely be executed. Li Shimin, however, convinced him to join a band of rebels, since death was already on his doorstep anyways. Yongguang had begun killing his own generals who were not doing a good enough job of defeating the rebels, and Li Yuan was up next on the chopping block. With a little left to lose, it was now or never, or else it would be Li Yuan's head. He spread rumors that the emperor was planning another invasion of Goguryeo that would require even more soldiers. Still fiercely angry about the last invasions, the peasants hit a breaking point. They did not want to die fighting for a clearly inferior army in a war that would not benefit them. This allowed Li Yuan and Li Shimin to garner more support for their rebellion and recruit soldiers. After Li Yuan ensured the safety of his family members through replaying secret messages, encouraging them to get away from the capital, the campaign to take the capital of Chang'an began. There were many doubts about the future of the rebels, as there were many other rebel groups as well as the Turks in the north vying for power. Li Yuan was very weak-minded and afraid, though Li Shimin was successful once again in encouraging him to saddle up and fight the Turks and other rebel groups. The army grew significantly in size, and the Li family was reunited. Surprisingly, Pingyang had formed a rebellion group of her own, which was 70,000 strong. The capital was taken in a major attack with all their forces, and Li Yuan snatched power away from Emperor Yongguang's grandson. The emperor himself was many miles away at this time in eastern China, but could not escape his long overdue fate. His own officials murdered him, and the Sui dynasty was without a doubt over. While the Sui rule was indeed very brief, ending in 618, father and son Li Yuan and Li Shimin had set the stage for a new golden age of Chinese history. The Tang Dynasty is viewed as one of the best eras of Chinese history. The empire was stable, the population grew from 50 to 80 million people, and many scientific and cultural advancements bloomed during this time. The reign is viewed so favorably that all these years later, ethnic Chinese people refer to the neighborhoods in western metropolitan areas commonly known as Chinatown as Tangranjie, which translates to the Tang People's Street. However, such good fortune did not come easy early on. While Li Yuan and his family had defeated the Sui, there still remained a great many threats to his future reign. Two dynasties were established to the east of the Tang, and the Turks were still a major threat in the north. Capitalizing on all the chaos of war that comes with rising and falling dynasties, the Turks had been slowly creeping into mainland China. Li Yuan declared himself the Tang Dynasty's first emperor, and Li Shimin was given the role of prime minister. The eldest of Li Yuan's sons, Li Jiansheng, who had helped in the rebellion as a key general, was named crown prince and the heir apparent, even though he did not have the same glorious military reputation that Li Shimin did. This made Li Jiansheng feel uneasy and overshadowed in his role as crown prince. An intense rivalry began between the two brothers. Li Jiansheng and another brother, Li Yuanji, began preparing a private army to stage a coup and assassinate Li Shimin. Yuanji supported Li Jiansheng as he wanted to be crown prince once Li Jiansheng became emperor. Unfortunately for the pair, word got out fairly quickly. Li Shimin received word from his soldiers, and Li Jiansheng's plan was foiled. He was put under house arrest by his father, prompting an associate of Li Jiansheng to formally rebel. Li Shimin was commanded to go out and kill the rebel leader, and was promised the title of crown prince upon his return to Chang'an. It didn't take much of an effort on Li Shimin's part to kill Li Jiansheng's associate. His own band of rebels killed him at the sight of the imperial army. Meanwhile, the weak-willed Li Yuan was caving in and easing up on his son back in the capital. Li Jincheng was very close with his father's concubines, who would often do his bidding and try to rehabilitate his image. At Li Jincheng's request, the women successfully convinced the emperor to go easy on his son, likely stressing the importance of family in such trying times. When Li Shimin returned, he was shocked to learn that Li Jincheng would be keeping his title of crown prince. But there was little time to process his father's ridiculous leniency and the forgiveness of his young brother. The Turks had moved just outside of Chang'an. Li Shimin had taken charge and organized a treaty involving regular payments to the imposing forces just 2 years prior in 622 AD. Though the threat was becoming more and more dangerous as they pushed closer to the capital, Li Shimin approached the Khagan, the leader of the Turks, outside of the city, and declared that if they had become dissatisfied with their previous agreement, then he and the Khagan should duel to the death. The Khagan was uncertain of what tricks Li Shimin had up his sleeve, and withdrew his armies back to their camp. Li Shimin and his army remained incredibly close by, and after a night of rainfall, sent a message detailing the Tang army's advantageous position, as well as his analysis of how the Turks' bows would likely be deteriorated by now. The people of the Eurasian steppes used composite bows made of wood and animal horns, which did not fare well during rainy seasons. Outsmarted by the witty Li Shimin, the Khagan agreed once again to the Tang's proposed peace treaty, and retreated without a drop of bloodshed on either side. Upon Li Shimin's return, it was all the more clear that he would be the next great leader of the Tang Dynasty. This made Li Jincheng all the more desperate to kill his brother and secure power. Li Jincheng hosted a banquet in his residence for his brothers, Li Shimin and Li Yuanji. He had poisoned Li Shimin's wine. Li Shimin was in such a horrible state that he needed to be carried home and barely survived the ordeal after vomiting blood all night. Li Yuan couldn't bear to witness the rivalry of his sons, and informed Li Shimin that he would be dividing the empire into 2 halves to avoid further conflict. Li Shimin was promised the rule of the eastern half, which he protested, but it was no use. His stubborn father had already made up his mind. The division failed to quell the rivalry. In the west, Li Jincheng and Li Yuanji continued plotting the murder of Li Shimin. In the east, Li Shimin was continuously encouraged by his cabinet to strike first and kill his brothers. Though, despite everything, he was still hesitant to plot an attack on his own family. When the Turks attacked once again in the summer of 626, the 2 conniving brothers saw the disorder as a chance to kill Li Shimin once and for all. Backed by Li Jincheng, Li Yuanji approached his father and asked to command the army against the invading Turks. Though the emperor was a bit hesitant, as he initially intended on sending the decorated Li Shimin to resist them, he agreed. Much to Li Jincheng's delight, Li Yuanji was able to turn many of Li Shimin's associates against him while organizing his army. Those who had once sided with Li Shimin and encouraged him to attack his brothers had given up on trying to convince him, and were now looking after their own lives instead. Because of this victory, the eldest brother promised Li Yuanji the title of crown prince once he became emperor, which would be any day now, should their plan work. The pair decided that after they killed Li Shimin, they would finally gain power by forcing their father to give up the throne. Shortly after, however, Li Jincheng and Li Yuanji were summoned to their father's court. Li Shimin had submitted a message to his father claiming that both Li Jincheng and Li Yuanji had been sleeping with many of the emperor's concubines. When the 2 brothers conferred on what to do, Li Yuanji argued that they should fake illnesses and not go. But Li Jincheng pulled rank and decided that they should both go to try and smooth out the situation to the best of their abilities. What ensued is what is now known as the Shanwu Gate incident. Upon their arrival at the Shanwu Gate, which served as an entrance to the palace city in Chang'an, they began to feel like something was wrong. They realized they were walking into a coup d'etat, and immediately tried to retreat. But by then, it was far too late. Li Shimin bound through the gates on horseback and called them over, which prompted Li Yuanji to draw his bow, but he was far too slow compared to the quick Li Shimin. Li Shimin quickly drew his own weapon and fired an arrow straight into Li Jincheng, killing him instantly. A chase ensued, with Li Yuanji trying to escape the scene before Li Shimin could kill him too. In the chaos, however, Li Shimin's horse became overwhelmed, throwing the middle brother off its back. Li Yuanji pounced on this opportunity and tried to strangle the fallen Li Shimin to death with his own bowstring. Just in the nick of time, Yuqi Jingde, an associate of Li Shimin, arrived and shouted at Li Yuanji. Li Yuanji tried to flee on foot, but was promptly killed by Yuqi's arrows. Overwhelmed by the situation, Li Yuan agreed that power would be handed over to the surviving son, Li Shimin, and that the opposing forces should submit to his rule. The male heirs of both Li Jincheng and Li Yuanji were promptly executed to prevent further destabilization. The two power-hungry brothers had started a battle that they could not finish, and it ultimately came at the cost of their families' lives. Li Yuan retired to a more ceremonious role, while Li Shimin was declared emperor. Though there was little time to celebrate his new role, the Turks had not stopped their advances to allow the House of Li to play out their family dramas. They had already reached the edges of Chang'an. Li Shimin opted for a non-violent confrontation once again, as he thought that Kagan's selfish and cruel treatment of his inferiors would eventually break apart the Turkic Khaganate and provide an easier opportunity to attack sometime in the future. The Tang Dynasty was too vulnerable to face them head-on right now, so Li Shimin simply renegotiated their peace treaty and agreed to pay tribute for the time being. In the meantime, the new emperor focused on building a basis of trust and free speech within his cabinet. He picked members based on their talent and intellect, and even allowed those who had served as advisors to his treacherous brothers to join his ranks if he thought it was what was best for the empire. Li Shimin encouraged his officials to speak honestly and critique his rule, and so together they worked on improving the domestic conditions of the empire before launching any attack on the Turks. China entered a very prosperous age with Li Shimin, now known as Emperor Taizong of Tang, at the helm of the empire. He is recognized today as the absolute greatest of the hundreds of emperors who came and went throughout Chinese history, and an argument could be made that